This is your CEO assessment tip, and today we're talking about power and authority. Two key concepts that your CEO candidate has to have a mastery on if they're going to succeed in the role. Authority is defined as what your title is, where you sit status-wise within the organizational structure. It is a formal function. Power is informal, it's intangible. Power sits with the amount of knowledge you have, wisdom you have, and respect you have from the team. Just to give you how these pieces work together, Gandhi had no official authority. He was not a politician, he was not a general, he had no official authority, but he had a huge amount of power and was the only one where the generals and everyone else failed to be able to push the British out of India. You look at Malcolm X, or you look at Nelson Mandela, or you look at Martin Luther King, all of them had no official authority, but they all had a huge amount of power and created a massive impact. So the CEO has to understand how these two work together and has to know how to leverage them to their advantage in order to drive results. Great CEOs will try and push power and authority down the organizational chart to the front line. They'll try to empower their front line. They'll try to give away as much power as they can. Bad CEOs will try to hoard power, and it will basically suffocate the organization, because when you have a CEO who's hoarding power, nothing can move in the company without the boss's signature, without the boss's thumbprint. It freezes the business, it slows the business down, it makes it very difficult for employees to give a good customer experience. On the flip side, CEOs that do push power down the organizational chain, they have a quicker, more agile organization, and they have a better customer experience. And they also probably have better risk and control function, because these two actually work together. In an organization where someone's not relinquishing power, it can also be a function that they don't have the right controls in place, they don't have the right risk protocols in place. So for example, if you take a simple quick service food restaurant, the cashier then has the power. One CEO will empower the cashier to comp a customer's meal if they're unhappy or they're disgruntled. Another CEO may not do that because they don't have controls in place to stop the cashier from giving free meals to all their friends. So these elements are all related. How does risk, control, power, authority all fit together? We're not going to talk about risk and controls right now. We're just talking about power and authority. So what kind of questions can we ask? So one question that I would ask is, give me an example of a time you restructured an organizational chart to push power and authority further down the chain. Have you ever done that? Question number two, as a CEO, you have a lot of power. Do you ever feel like relinquishing some of it would be to your benefit? Have you ever done that? Question number three that I would ask is, can you give me an example of a time that you increased the power that your frontline employees have? How did you give them more power? What did you do to empower them? How much resources are they allowed to allocate without getting a sign-off from a manager? So you're at a hotel, does the front desk employee, entry-level employee, have the ability to comp a free room night or upgrade a customer who's upset? These all feed into your customer experience and the agility of the organization. That is part one, which is really using power and authority to manage down the organization. A big part of this is also managing up the organization. If your CEO does not understand how to use power and authority properly, they will not effectively interact with your board, and they may also end up getting terminated. One thing that a new CEO or a smart CEO will do coming into an organization is called closing the back door. And they will assess the organization and they will look at where does authority sit and where does power sit in the organization. And this is another question that you can ask. You can ask the CEO, where does power sit in your organization? Where do you think power sits in this new organization that you're coming into? What things do you need to do to adjust to that? And so, for example, you have a board where the chairman has had the same sanitary engineer in the factory for 20 years. And in fact, that janitor, his father worked for the chairman's father. So for 2 generations, these families have worked together, but at different ends of the spectrum, one as owner, one as the employee. So this janitor has a personal relationship with the chairman. Now the CEO is implementing new manufacturing lines, and the janitor is going on the weekend to the chairman's house and telling him, well, we don't really need this new line, the plant's not at full utilization, you really shouldn't do it. Well, Monday morning comes around and the chairman calls the CEO into his office and says, you know what, I don't think we really need this manufacturing line. Actually, the janitor is undoing decisions by the CEO over the weekend. This is a true story, this actually happened. So the power that the janitor has is actually stronger than the power of the CEO. So good CEOs need to come in and understand this and tell the board, and they have to have it in the Constitution, that the communication coming from the company into the board should really flow through the CEO, the CFO, maybe your chief risk officer, your chief internal auditor. So you only have 4, 2, 3, 4, maximum 4 communication points into the board. And this is called closing the back door and shutting down those communication points that are going to dilute the power, influence, and authority of the CEO. So that's an example of how complex these topics are for power and authority. Your CEO has to know how to use these both up the chain in managing the board and down the chain in terms of managing the organization and the staff. That's your CEO assessment tip for the week. Those are a few questions you can use to catch a CEO off balance. If you like those, you could pick up our book, CEO Assessment and Selection, which has over 400 questions that you can use in your CEO interviews. Also, on our book page, you can download a free sample of the book, and you can get a link to our book page in the description of this video.